Welcome to this week's edition of Black Authors Matter TV, where we interview the latest movers and shakers in the African American literary community. You'll meet some old friends, discover new ones, and stay abreast of the latest book developments around the country and even the world. So sit back and relax for the next 2 hours with Black Authors Matter TV co-hosts Gwen Richardson and Dr. Rhonda Lawson.
Hi, I'm Gwen Richardson, and welcome to the May 30th edition of Black Authors Matter TV. I'm your host for tonight, and my co-host, Dr. Rhonda Lawson, is on vacation in Europe. So before we proceed with the rest of the show, she sent us a video message that she wants to share with everybody, and we're going to play that first, then we're going to get right into the show.
Hey, what's up, readers and shakers? It's your girl, Dr. Rhonda M. Lawson, and I am bringing you greetings from Paris, France. So I am having a good time. I do miss you guys, but I don't miss being home right now because I really needed this time to just relax and reconnect and recharge. And that's exactly what I'm doing this week while I'm in Paris. I'll be heading to London in a few days. But some of the things I'm going to be doing is connecting with books and readers and writers who are out here in Europe. Okay, so since they're closed, I'm just going to walk back because on the way here we did pass Notre Dame and some other nice places, so I'm just going to take a nice stroll back. Wasted my Uber money. Glad it wasn't expensive. So I thought I'd check in with you guys. I'm really enjoying myself on my vacation, but I have to admit to you that there are much more beautiful cities than Paris. In fact, there are a lot of cities that you may not have even heard of that are way prettier than Paris. However, it's always good to come back to Paris because there's just a vibe in this city that is unmatched by a lot of other cities.
So that was a message from Dr. Rhonda Lawson. She'll be back next week. She is on her European vacation. And enjoy yourself, Rhonda. One day when I grow up, I'm going to be going on a European vacation too. So anyway, we're going to get right into our show. We have an amazing lineup tonight, and we're going to be bringing on our first guest now. And our first guest is Dr. Geneva Williams. She's an entrepreneur and an author and a motivational speaker. And she has actually 2 books, although there's only one listed on the interview form that she sent in. But I like her to talk about the 2 books, both of the books that I saw. So, Dr. Geneva, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Well, how are you, Gwen? Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here with you. And I just am such an admirer and everything that you've done in the community and just, having such a platform for Black authors and books and learning and all that sort of good stuff. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, well, we're excited to have you. And you have done some I tell people I've lived 5 lives, and it sounds like you're close to that too. So,
at least.
Yeah.
And it's been fun.
Yeah, there's going to be some lives you don't want to tell people about. I don't know if that's your case, but anyway, some of the lives were short-lived, and it was just like an experience, a learning experience. But it's all in learning and growing and maturing. And
That's
so,
right.
Having said that, I wanted to first talk about your book, Living Life Over 50. Secrets to Finding Love in Your Vibrant Style and What's Next for You. Because in this society that tends to glorify youth, a lot of people, especially women, not men as much, I don't think, I mean, I can't speak for men, but just from my observation, sometimes women feel like they have to kind of give up when they turn 50. And when I say give up, I mean, it's still important to care about your presentation of yourself.
Yes.
To care about your health, especially, which becomes over 50, that's when a lot of problems start to manifest if you haven't been diligent before that. And just, you know, you have a lot more years now. People are living longer, so they have a lot more years, and they should plan to do something in those years rather than just kind of wait for the clock to run out. You know?
Absolutely.
So what made you write that book?
Well, just really the reasons you're talking about. So often it's about how we approach that half a century mark. And sometimes we think, oh, it's going to be, you know, I've lived so long. What am I going to do? All these changes. Look what's happening to my body, my mind. People are treating me different. You have all of these things going on in your head. On the other hand, you know, when you hit that 50 mark, nobody can tell you anything because you've got that experience. You've been through some stuff. You probably have a testimony because you got lots of tests and all of that. And I think it's about how we think about it and approach it. And in fact, it can be the best years because of our experience, what we've been through, the opportunities that are out there. And so, yes, Gwen, I decided to write that book because I wanted to share with women advice and tips about style, about looking good, feeling good, and doing good, continue to do good in the community. And so I just, you know, love working on that particular issue with women. And in fact, much of my business now is working with being a mentor and strategist with women who are in their midlife years and are running businesses, are entrepreneurs, are leaders of nonprofit organizations, and they're dealing with a lot of the ups and downs of this particular time in their life, yet they still want to be vibrant, achieve goals, still contribute and all of that. And we can do that and more during this second act of our life. So the book is a guide for women who want some inspiration, tips, advice, strategies for how to make the best of your second act and to turn that influence that you've got, because you've been through it, you've got influence, turn that influence into even greater impact in life.
Oh, that's great. Do you have a copy of that book handy?
You know, I do. It's in my bookcase, and you know, I've got this.
I know we're going to talk about both.
And I know, and I had, you know, I said we're going to talk about it. It's right there in my bookcase, and I'm going to get it while we talking.
Okay. Well, we can. Why don't we circle back to that one?
Okay.
And then because I just saw that.
Oh no!
And I
so
thought,
glad.
wow, this is a great topic because
absolutely.
One thing that I noticed, well, a couple of things I noticed, and then we'll go to your other book, Justice on the Jersey Shore.
Yes.
But sometimes when people get close to retirement or they retire, they don't have a plan for what to do after retirement. They just kind of sit down, and that's not good for your health, your physical health, or your mental health. Because if you don't stay engaged, you become disconnected.
Absolutely. And we as humans, we need that connection. Yeah. We really do. And that's why I created the Vibrant Life Blueprint, which really helps women go in particular, but I have men who've been a part of my program as well, but who, this blueprint takes you through thinking about, rethinking, reimagining, well, what can my life look like? as I age, and putting your goals together and making sure you've got the best health care plan and you're taking care of yourself. And Gwen, I really got into this and developed that particular system because I had lost my husband after 40 years of marriage, and I lost my mom and my dad all around the same time that my husband passed. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I was lost, and I had to reinvent myself. And one day I realized that, listen, I got more years in me, and
Right.
I want to live, not only live a long life, which most of us do, want to live a long life. We don't want to
Right.
grow old.
Right. Well, it's
afraid
what
of
kind of
aging.
condition are you going to be in your later
Exactly.
years?
And that's what I want. I wanted to live a long time, but I wanted to do it my way and do it vibrantly. So
Right.
that's when I began to put together, a game plan for, well, what can my life look like? And that's what I think we need to really think about, to be intentional about, well, what are the goals we want to achieve? And what do we want to look like through these years? And do we want a new career? And what about that dream we've always had? One of mine was to start a business after I had been in the nonprofit world for so long, Gwen. I wanted to do something different. And when I reinvented myself and thought about and made that vision and, really said, well, can I do it? And that's what I'm doing today.
Well, and that's great. And entrepreneurship is something that's available to people at any time.
Absolutely.
I was 25 when I first went in business, and I haven't had a boss since then.
Isn't that wonderful?
It is wonderful, but it's not easy. I know you have different
That's right.
challenges when you work for yourself, and when whether you have employees or not. I've been through that whole thing.
Yes.
Now I don't have any. I don't want any. I don't ever want any more. Just the workforce has changed.
It has. I do trainings with AARP, talking with their members about how to start a business when you're in your mid-years. And it's really, as you were saying, it's really the perfect time to do that because you've had so much experience. You've seen and you've had the experiences in the workplace, and you probably have some great ideas. It's tough sometimes, but it gives you such a freedom and flexibility. And so many people want that, particularly in their later years.
Yeah. Well, one thing, when you're your own boss, you can make a decision and act on it.
That's
you
right.
You don't have to wait for validation, approval, committees, or whatever. You don't have to worry about politics, office politics, any kind of politics. If you have an idea, you have the resources, you can execute it. And the window of that can be very short when you work for yourself doing someone else. And you can kind of think outside the box, and you can try different things, because what's the worst that can happen? That somebody told me that before I went into my first business. What if, I said, well, what if this happens? And this was an older gentleman at the time. He was probably old enough to be my dad. But I said, well, what if this happens? He said, well, what if it doesn't? So I said, okay, you're right. So that's part of being an entrepreneur, is you have to be fearless in many ways. You can't be fearful. You have to
That's right. Well, entrepreneurship is about taking risks.
Yes.
And, it's
the
very
definition
risky.
of the word.
That's right. It's very risky, high reward, but it's risky. And one of the things that's important is to figure out, what the problem is you want to try to solve, what your idea is for trying to, for solving that problem. Put yourself a game plan together. Think about your funding. Sometimes, coming out of your own pocket first or family and friends is what you have to do, because you will need to finance your dream in some way, but make a plan about that, and then get out there and try it and do it. Why not? As you said, it's not about perfection. It's about the progress you can make.
Right, because it's never going to be perfect. There's never going to be a perfect time. If people say, I'm waiting for a perfect time, it's like having a child. There's never a perfect time. It's your willingness to put yourself in terms of having children, put yourself second. That's really, when you're comfortable doing that, then it's all good. So let's talk about Justice on the Jersey Shore.
Yes.
And this book is about an individual named Erman K. Jones. Yes. And what is the setting? I guess it's Jersey Shore, which would be New Jersey.
That's right. In a small town on the Jersey Shore.
Okay, so who is Erman Jones related to you, or is he someone that you wanted to write about, that you admire?
Erman K. Jones is my dad.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so this is a story, a love story from the perspective of me as the daughter writing about my dad. It's a dual perspective book because it has his thoughts and words in it, as well as my thoughts and words in it. In fact, we had planned to publish it together, but he passed before that happened. And though it took me a few years after he passed, I couldn't bring myself back to doing it, to putting it out there, to publishing. I finally did it because, Gwen, my dad wanted me to, it's great to have a book about him. He was thrilled about having me write something. But what he was most interested in was having, the history for young people so they could see and learn about, civil rights, action, leadership. And so my dad was an ordinary man who did some extraordinary things. He and my mom were, he was a government worker. My mom was a school teacher. They were civil rights activists. And he was most known for the work he did in housing. And one day he and my mom had decided that they wanted to, move and get their first dream house. But he kept being stalled by the realtor and couldn't understand why. And then finally, the realtor just broke down and said, Mr. Jones, we don't sell homes to Negroes. And so my dad, who was raised in the small town of Neptune in New Jersey, he was a hero, an athletic star. Everybody knew him, and it was a small town. He just couldn't take it. So that began a 3-year fight that he and my mom went through, hate mail, cross burned on the lawn, death threats, all of that, until finally the state Supreme Court of New Jersey ruled in his favor. And it turned out to be a landmark housing suit that really changed and affected housing discrimination in New Jersey. And so I wanted to tell this story of this ordinary man who just said no, who, while during the time of your hearing, you'd hear all about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and all of these great heroes who we love, my dad, my mom, and thousands of Black folk around the country were making their own changes. And he was one of them. And I tell his story through a series of interviews that I had with him. We grew up reading the, newspapers and seeing him in print, but I wanted to really dive into some of the behind the scenes things. And I found out so much, like the death threats that I really didn't know about. I thought my mom and dad, were just strict on me and my sister and kept us in all the time. We couldn't go to the places that other kids went to. But later on, I found out that it was because of the actual fear of being killed, being threatened, which he was all the time. And so I wanted to tell his story. He wanted his story told so that young people could learn about what I consider to be inspired leadership, and that every one of us has that influence, that leadership in us. And hey, we can unlock it and do extraordinary things.
Well, that's an amazing story. And it just, a couple of things came to my mind when you were talking about it. One, a lot of people assume that all of the civil rights work was only going on below the Mason-Dixon line, and that isn't true. In fact, some of the worst racial incidents when integration came about was in Boston, Chicago area. That it was in fact, Martin Luther King went to Chicago and said in some cases it was worse than being in Birmingham. And so people, when they think about New Jersey, they don't think about the civil rights struggle.
That's right.
But it was going on everywhere. It was going on everywhere.
And Gwen, it's funny as I think about it. The book that I wrote about my dad, given the climate of today, would probably be banned in Florida, given what's going on. And I had an indication of that. I didn't know it at the time, but when I was with a publisher, I had to leave one publisher and go to another because my first publisher wanted me to change several of the stories that were in the book that talked about the racial slurs, the discrimination, the threats, et cetera, that were levied against my father and our family. And they wanted us to remove those pieces. They even wanted us not to use the word Negro, but use the words, Black or African American. And they didn't want us to use the N word when that's in fact, when the police stopped my dad or when they made the death threats, that's what they said to him.
The word they used.
And so those were the things that gave gives the story color, but they would not, they wanted me to change the book. So I had to leave them and go to another publisher from Archway Publishing of Simon and Schuster, which is, a fabulous company. But in order to publish the book. And so as you think about those things in today's climate, now this was, 2018. If you think about it in today's climate, Gwen, in Florida, my book would probably be on the list, given what's going on, as there's this ban on learning about our history. And that's really what this book is. It's a history lesson about civil rights leadership of ordinary people. And what it says to us is that you, no matter what your title is, no matter what your position is, you in fact can make a difference in your community, in your life, and for others. And that's the essential lesson of this book, along with acknowledging the courage of ordinary people to make change for our community.
Yeah, you can't try to sugarcoat history. You have to say it the way it was said. Otherwise, it's not factually correct. It's like quoting somebody and changing what their quote.
Absolutely. So I could not.
That's it's not plagiarism. That's when you copy somebody. But it's like defamation or slander if you use words they didn't use. And it
Right.
could be negative or positive, but
Absolutely.
we need to quote and Negro with the nice word that was used
Exactly.
back then. Colored too was another one that
Exactly.
was not considered a nicer word.
And I think what the real issue was and is it really wasn't about the terminology as much as it was that it wasn't the truth. It wasn't authentic and the real story. And my dad and I, that's why we did it. We were determined to tell the real story, because otherwise, why write this chronicle of the trauma and distress and fear that he went through and my family went through, and in spite of that, made a difference, a change. That's what this country is about, really. And there's so many people from all walks of life, all different colors, all different places, who are doing that, making those changes and making changes in our community. So, and a lot has to do with the work, Gwen, that I do today in working with leaders, helping them turn that influence that they have in their leadership positions, whatever they are, into greater impact, so that they do the best for themselves, they do the best for the people they lead, and they also find ways to create social change and greater impact in community. Because when we can do that together, we can make it better for our children.
Right. While you go pick up the other book, I want to make another point. So you should still be able to hear me around what you said. Okay. She's going to get her other book so she can show both covers before we end the interview. But one other thing that you said,
right here.
Okay, there you go. Living
There
life
you go.
over 50.
Living life over 50.
Mhm.
Secrets to finding love, your vibrant style, and what's next for you.
So that's one of her books for
Yeah.
those who are over 50, approaching 50. You need to, if you are looking for a sense of direction, just something to give you some ideas, some encouragement.
Absolutely.
That is the next chapter, is not the end.
That's right.
So,
Go to Amazon and go
and look up Dr. Geneva
I'm
Williams.
on, yes, I'm on
And-
Dr. Geneva Speaks on all social media platforms. You go to Amazon, you can find me. I've got an author page, Geneva Williams. And please, I would love to have feedback. So if you go and purchase either one of these books, please give it a review. Give me feedback. Let me know what you think, what your ideas and strategies are, how you're living life over 50, and how you're, turning your own influence into impact for yourself and for your family and for your community. I'd love to hear it. Gwen, I'm a late life entrepreneur. I didn't step out of nonprofit world and into the business world until my late 60s. And so I've been there, and I know how scary it could be to step out and do something new with your life and fulfill those dreams that you've always had, and reinvent yourself. And that's what I work with women on now, because you in fact you can do it.
Yeah, one thing about going in business at 25, like I did, is you don't know what you don't know, and you're really not scared of anything. You should be, but you're too idealistic and naive to be scared. So that's, if you're gonna do it, if you know you want to do it, like I knew at 15 that I wanted to be.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
So it was just when the opportunity presented itself, I took it. So
that's good. Yeah.
But entrepreneurship is a good experience for everybody. to experience at least once in your life. It doesn't mean it has to be forever. Like with me, it's forever. But it doesn't have to be forever. Sometimes you can be an entrepreneur, gain some experience, and that can position you for another position in corporate or nonprofit or whatever. It can make connections. But you're making connections as an entrepreneur, a business owner, rather than an employee. It changes the whole dynamic of the conversation. Well, Dr. Geneva, we're at the end of our time. Can you show the two books again?
Oh, yes. And again, both of them you can get on Amazon. Geneva Williams is my author page, Living Life Over 50. Gwen, Secrets to Finding Love, Your Vibrant Style, and What's Next for You. So it's an easy read. It's a fun read, please. And Justice on the Jersey Shore. And the foreword is by DeForest Buster Soares, who was, the former Secretary of State of New Jersey, now a pastor. Reverend Soares is well-known, well-respected brother. And so he did the foreword, and that's Justice on the Jersey Shore, How Erman K. Jones Ignited Change and Won. So that's it.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Geneva. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
And
continued success with your entrepreneurial venture and all the things that you're doing. You sound like you're just really setting the world on fire at over 50.
That's right. Several decades over. Still,
but you wear it extremely well.
Well, thank you. And it just shows that, we can do it all at any age.
That's right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Gwen.
Okay.
Pleasure.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Before we bring on our next guest, I have a couple of announcements. First of all, if you're planning to register as an author for the National Black Book Festival, our standard registration ends tomorrow, May 31st. And after May 31st, we're in late registration, where right now we have about 80%, a little over 80% capacity. So people have really been registering this year for the festival. And the other item is the Black Authors Matter Children's Book Awards. The process ends June 5th, which is Monday. If you want to submit your book, it has to be postmarked by Monday, June 5th. So those are two housekeeping notes, and I'm going to do the book giveaway after this interview. So, and we're only doing one book giveaway this week because Rhonda's not on and she can't check everything for me. So our next guest is a novelist, and she has a new book out, but she has other books that she's written as well. And this book is her new book is called Nigeria Jones, but her name is Ibi Zoboi. I think it's pronounced Zoboi, but she will correct me if I'm wrong on the name pronunciation. And her book, Nigeria Jones, just came out a couple of weeks ago, and it has a very interesting plot and storyline. So as soon as we can get her on camera, we welcome Ibi Zoboi to Black Authors Matter TV. And since she's not on camera yet, there we go. Okay. Okay, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I feel like I'm I'm trying to match your energy there with the background.
Oh, okay. Well,
should I blur my background? It's okay.
It's up to you. Whatever makes you feel like it's the best presentation of you.
Okay.
But I think your background right there is fine with all those books behind you, and you have the book, your new book, Nigeria Jones, sitting right there.
Yes, it is.
And it's a hardcover.
It is a hardcover, beautifully illustrated by Natrice Gaskin and designed by Jenna Stemple at HarperCollins. So yes, this is my latest book, Nigeria Jones.
Now, is it for young adult? is it young adult fiction, or is it just your regular mainstream or women's fiction?
It's categorized as young adult fiction, but anybody, you know, from 12, 13 until infinity
Okay.
can read it. Even before I started writing for children, I was reading children's books for pleasure. And I enjoyed those children's books far more than I enjoyed a lot of adult books. So this is why I write for children.
Oh, okay. You know, I wasn't aware that it was a young adult fiction book. Because when we got the art, it wasn't obvious. But when you showed it to me, the size, because normally the young adult fiction books are a little bit smaller than
Oh
their
no,
standard.
you got some thick books. No, young
Well,
adult
I don't
books.
mean smaller in terms of word count.
Mhm.
They're normally a little bit smaller in terms of the size, even the hardcovers.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
They're a
there's
little
some.
bit smaller than your standard
Mhm.
paperback for an adult audience. And
Oh,
so now it
well,
looks like it might be 400 pages or so.
it is. It is.
Okay.
Young
Okay.
adult books. There's a range. You know, they can be smaller.
Yes.
They could be long. Fantasy books can be like 500, 600 pages.
Yes.
And it's for young people. You know, if you remember those Harry Potter days, those Harry Potter books were door stoppers.
They were very thick. I never read one, but my
Yeah.
daughter, I think, she didn't read. I don't think she read. My daughter's 27 now. I think when Harry Potter was out, did she read Harry Potter? I can't remember. I don't think so. She wasn't into Harry Potter. But
Well,
I
they
definitely
were big
remember they were
books.
thick. They were thick
Yeah.
books. So Nigeria Jones is based on it's a group, a Black separatist group in Philadelphia. And it reminded me, there used to be a group in Philadelphia that I think it was decades ago. I'm
The
trying to
Move
remember.
organization. It was actually called Move.
Okay.
Mhm.
And they I think wasn't there a fire or something where a lot of them were
Yes,
killed or something?
they were bombed. Their homes were bombed by the
Okay.
Philadelphia Police Department in
Okay.
1985. It
Okay.
sounds like something from the 50s or 60s, but it was 1985, and I
Yeah,
was a little girl in 1985.
I have a vague memory of when it happened. I don't remember any details other than that. And when I was reading your synopsis, I was wondering if it was based on that, or were you reflecting about that when you read it, or I mean when you wrote it, or what made you use that as your plot, your storyline?
So I'm not necessarily it's a nod to it. It's a nod to the
Okay.
Move organization because that's the one people know about because of a tragedy. But
Okay.
there are, and nothing tragic happened in terms of for the community, nothing tragic happens like that in the book. But I set it in Philadelphia because Move is was in Philadelphia, and they're still there. And Pennsylvania as a whole, it's known for its separatist communities, and not just Black ones, but we know about
The
Pennsylvania,
Amish.
the Amish.
That's
And
right.
I had read an article that some of the most radical groups in terms of white nationalists too are in Pennsylvania. And I know Pennsylvania can swing either red or blue. And Pennsylvania was founded by Quakers. Pennsylvania's named for William Penn. Pennsylvania literally means Penn's Woods. Philadelphia means brotherly, the philo words is in there, which means brother or love. So it's known as the city of brotherly love. And all these ideas about just radical ideas at the time were present in Pennsylvania. So I wanted to also present the question to the reader: who gets to have certain freedoms? Who gets to have freedoms in terms of a community, a family, and in this case, a Black girl. So it's all these levels of freedom. What does freedom mean for a community? What does freedom mean for a family? And what does freedom mean for a girl?
So the name Nigeria Jones, what made you name her that Nigeria Jones?
Yeah,
I know it's from another book too, but
yeah, it's this started out, a friend of mine, she kind of grew up like this, like a lot of people who I knew who grew up like this, and we were thinking of just telling her story, and I would help her. And the name Nigeria Joan has stuck for nearly 20 years, about just a girl growing up the way that I was trying to raise my daughters, not necessarily some of the negative things, but I was trying to raise my daughters in Afrocentric communities. They were taking African dance when they were toddlers. And there was a program that they would go to, Saturday school, where at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, they were being instilled with a lot of self-confidence about who they are and where they come from. They used to sing a song that went, African, African, I can, I can, I can, and I can do anything. That part of their mantra. They grew up part in a way that made them love their skin and their hair and their culture. And I wanted them to be instilled with those like ideas from the time that they were started talking. And we celebrate Kwanzaa, so they understand their Black identity. My children are West African, Caribbean, and Black American. All three things, so they represent the diaspora. And I wanted them to grow up knowing that all those three parts of themselves are all connected, and they're not just Black, they are African, Caribbean, Black American, and for them to understand how all those identities intersect.
okay. Well, having pride in who you are is extremely important, especially for Black children. And a lot of times they don't get the reinforcement everywhere, like not every institution reinforces it. So it is important, but it does begin at home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we can't rely on other people to give them that sense of pride. It really does start with at home with the parents. But the name Nigeria Jones, as far as a book title and the name of the character, is very compelling. It's a hook, and it's memorable. It's important for people to remember a book title when they want to refer somebody to a book. It's good if the title is something very memorable. Just so you can share it with other people. And Nigeria Jones is something just about everybody could remember if you said it. So that's good.
Yeah, it's a metaphor for African American. You often talk about the African part of our identity. And, Nigeria is an African country. So the metaphor is that, this is a girl who's coming to terms with what it means to have an African identity and what it means to have an American identity. And she's also Haitian like me. So all those identities are intersecting. Her parents want her to know about Africa, but she's never been. And her parents want her to really, really lean on the freedoms and the Constitution that America affords her. And she is grappling with that as well, because she's supposed to have freedom, but she doesn't feel so free as a 16-year-old Black girl.
Okay. So in the book, she's homeschooled and she's a vegan, and she participates in traditional rituals. So were you homeschooled, or did you homeschool your children?
I was not homeschooled, and I did not homeschool my children. However, it is a dream that I had. And sometimes I have a teenage son, and sometimes I think about it really hard. So all of these, the story were ideals that I had when my children were little. I wanted to homeschool them. I wanted to stay vegan. I used to be vegan, but I love me some chicken. And all these things I had in mind when I was a young mother. I wanted my children to be part of a loving community. I wanted them to go to a Black school with Black teachers and they were learning Black history, but that did not happen. So it was a vision of utopia that I had in mind that didn't quite happen, but I know people who were raised in those communities. These communities still exist to this day. A lot of them were started in the late 60s and the 70s and all throughout, the early 80s, but they still exist today. And this is kind of a what if novel. What if these communities are still thriving? And what if a girl is living in that community, but she doesn't want to be part of that community because her father is so strict? So in order to, to be homeschooled and to be vegan, that means that your parents have a lot of rules for what you can and cannot do. And like all teenagers, she's going to want to break them. And this is the journey of how she finds herself in the midst of everything that her father dreams up and what her mother dreams for her. And she has to learn what dreams she has for herself.
So is the feedback that you've gotten so far from young adult readers, have you gotten much feedback from them? Do they identify with Nigeria?
I have not. I have heard from young readers. My husband has passed the book out to some of his more avid readers, and he told me they're passing the book around, and he's sending me pictures of his students who are reading the book in school. So with young people, it's like they're not sending you a review or anything like that. A lot of them are not writing reviews, but a testament.
They might share it.
They will share the book, and that's what they do. And a lot of young people, they're not, talking about books on TikTok, they're reading. And my husband did let me know that a lot of these girls who are reading are not on TikTok.
Well, that's one thing, because TikTok can be become an obsession.
And a distraction.
Yeah.
It's word of mouth. And usually with young people, they're not the Black girls that are resonating who the book is resonating for them. Oftentimes they're not running to the bookstore to go buy it. They're sharing it amongst themselves. So I'm going to send him some more copies so they can share it. And that's usually, sometimes that doesn't make money for the publisher. They're sharing it. But what's important for me is that they're reading it and they're connecting to the character in the book. In terms of the other part of it is reviewers or teachers. And what I'm learning about this book is that we haven't told these stories about Black people who try to separate themselves from society in big and small ways. And when there's no context for something, people think that you make it up or it's not possible. But I just posted on my Instagram, there's a documentary on Amazon called The Sun Rises in the East. And it's about an organization called the East that was around the same time as MOVE. And what they did in a section of Bedford-Stuyvesant is they had their own Black community, a thriving Black community, where it was a cultural center and it was a school, and they had their own bookstore, their own grocery store, their own, senior center, and all these safe spaces for the people to come together and be themselves. And, because of finances, because of, upward mobility and people not being able to own the buildings that they're residing in, the community fell apart. And this is part of American history that we don't get to hear. We don't know about all these little communities that organized themselves and were thriving for a very long time. And they were supported by the community. The children were safe and loved. And because a lot of them didn't end tragically, or there isn't a traumatic story to tell, they're not valued, and we don't hear about them. So when I write about it, some readers who are not from these communities think that it's made up.
Well, what you described is what actually was in place in the South before integration.
Right, right.
Most of the information that people get about the South before integration is all negative, and it's all basically they make it look like Black people were under siege by the Klan 24/7. But in the South, Black communities had their own space, and their space was safe. The children were safe. The children were loved. It was, people refer to the village. It was an actual village. The teachers, there was Black teachers. The schools were Black, and the local churches and everybody kind of lived together, and everyone knew each other. So there was protection. And once integration came, the objective for integration was to have the children go to upgraded facilities. But what happened was all the Black schools were either closed, or like the Black high schools, for example, that was a major institution for communities. And when they integrated, they shut down most of the Black high schools. They either shut them down altogether, or they turned them into middle schools. And so you lost that connection. So not enough of the, normally when, like you said, unless it ends in a tragedy, or it's always told and viewed through the lens of tragedy rather than community. That word needs to get out more. I'm doing some research myself for a future children's book I plan to do on just some of that. Just because it's not enough of it gets out. Very little of it gets out. We just have, it's like we're encaptured by 5 or 6 points in history. You know, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, the 3 civil rights leaders who were killed and murdered and they were buried, Emmett Till. There's a few, and then it's like everything else is just has gotten lost. So we need more references to things that happened in previous years, so that young people don't think that if it didn't happen in the 2000s, it didn't happen. So you know, a whole lot of stuff happened for us to get to the 2000s.
Yeah, this is the same with in the North, in big cities, because we didn't have those spaces. A lot of times we didn't own the buildings, right? There would be communities and the houses would be falling apart. And I know this happened in Chicago and in New York City. And, you know, you may do with what you had in that corner of the city, but they started building highways through our communities. And once they built the highways, people had to spread out all over the city, and the housing projects were built. But what happened in places like Chicago and New York and maybe Boston and Baltimore and DC, people gathered around schools and trying to teach children their history. So within the East, it was a neighborhood in Brooklyn called Brownsville, where the community was given, you know, just the power to determine their school board. And so they had the power to hire and fire teachers. And when they saw that the non-Black teachers didn't care about their kids the way a Black teacher would, they, you know, wanted to move those teachers out. But the teachers union said, you can't do that. And they started to strike. And this is where J2 Wasey, a Black teacher, Black male teacher, said, we need our own schools where the city doesn't have to get involved, where the teachers union doesn't have to get involved, and we hire our Black teachers to teach our Black children. So the same thing, you know, the same thing was happening in big cities, but what also happened is that people became autonomous, people took it into their own hands to create those communities that they remember in the South. So this is what I've tried to do in the book, where the father, in order to do that, he has to kind of control the community. He tries to create a village house where he brings in anybody who needs help. And, there's food, there's seminars. He insists that everybody be homeschool or attend his school that he's trying to build. And he's really trying to create a movement. And I call it the movement, kind of a placeholder. It's not named after anything except the word Sankofa. Sankofa means to go back and fetch. And he's trying to do this, but I wanted to tell the story of a girl living in that community. Imagine you raising a house, she could possibly have her own room, but there's always people coming in and out because her father feels like he's the village leader. So in the midst of that, how do you find your way when your father is trying to be everybody's daddy,
Yeah, that would be a different kind of environment. Now you have other books as well. So I want to touch on those because we only have a few minutes left. And Nigeria Jones is actually part of an anthology, Black Enough. It was one of the stories in that anthology. And then you decided to make it a full-blown novel. And that's
Yes.
great. But just tell us about your other books. American Street is one of them. And Pride, a Pride and Prejudice remix. So tell us about those two books quickly.
American Street was my first novel, and it tells the story of a Haitian immigrant girl who is coming to Detroit for the first time to live with her mother, her aunts, and her cousins, but her mother is detained, and she has to navigate Detroit and her Americanized family and try to get her mother. And she soon realizes that the American dream is not the dream that, what she envisioned. America can be nightmarish at times. This is, a dark book. It takes a turn, but it tells the story of a tenacious girl who is really passionate about her dreams and cares for her mother and cares for her family. And she's willing to do what it takes to find that American dream because she does believe that it's real. My second book is called Pride, and it's a Pride and Prejudice remix, Pride and Prejudice, the classic by Jane Austen. And it's about a girl in Brooklyn in a gentrifying neighborhood where a rich Black boy moves in across the street, and he gets to have a whole brownstone to himself and his family, but she is in a 1-bedroom apartment with her 4 other sisters and her parents. So, they meet and they don't like each other at first, but you know how the story goes. And that was a fun book to write. And Black Enough is an anthology where I brought together 16 other YA authors to just write stories, just regular stories about regular kids doing regular things. And the only thing that they have in common is that they are all Black.
Okay. So they come from all different backgrounds. Well, they're all Black, but that doesn't mean they live in the same neighborhood.
Right. They're doing different things, getting into different things and live in different neighborhoods. And my story was the last story in the collection. It's called The Revolution of Nigeria Jones, about a girl whose father is this militant leader, and she just wants to go leave for one night and just have fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure for children of people who are high profile leaders to either follow in their footsteps, or they have to kind of walk a narrow road where they almost have to be perfect, and that's impossible. So it's challenging. I think about Martin Luther King's kids. They really could never just be normal people, he's a martyr and a saint in terms of, if anybody is a saint among Black history or Black people, it would be him. And with saints, most of the time in history, I don't know if any of the saints, and I know Catholics believe in saints, and I'm not Catholic, but I don't think they get married. I don't think the saints are always single. And so, you know, Martin Luther King's kids, you know, they could just they could never be just normal. They could never just live normally. It was so much pressure to just be another civil rights leader, or you couldn't just be a regular person. So I understand it. So now, how do you pronounce your last name? Because I said Zoboi. Is that right?
Yeah, Zoboi. That sounds
Okay,
right.
I did. Okay, I did. Okay, so how can people connect with you on social media? And I know your books are available pretty much everywhere, but if people do want to connect with you, are you online under your name, or you're under a moniker of some kind?
I'm under EB Zoboi at EB Zoboi on. I'm only on Instagram for
Okay.
now, but my website is ebzaboy.net.
Okay.
So, you know, you can find my books wherever books are sold, but I'm of the mind of, you know, I don't have to be, you know, in your face every day telling you to buy my book. So I'm not that much, I'm not on all social media platforms. So please, I think I'm going to start a newsletter soon. So you all can just purchase the book and try to stay, you know, try to keep up with what I'm doing online, and with a newsletter coming up soon.
Okay, and did you have another book coming out next year? Do you already have one
But it
slated?
hasn't been announced. It hasn't been
Okay.
announced. That's
Oh,
secret.
okay. Well, thank you for being a guest on Black Authors Matter TV. I think your book is different. You know, your storyline is definitely different for young adults or for regular adults,
And
for
and
grown people. So
and
it's always good to not have the same book. You know, a lot of the storylines sometimes can be repetitious. And this one, Nigeria Jones, sounds like a very interesting character. So thank you so much for being a guest on the show. And
thank you so
we
much.
wish you continued success with your writing.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you.
Okay,
Have a
you're
good
welcome.
evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So now we're going to have our final guest, and her name is Cassandra Jackson. And her book is recent released memoir. Let me see. It came out last Tuesday was her release date. So we're getting her on the show soon after the release of the book. And her book is a memoir. It's called In the Wreck, a daughter's memoir of becoming a mother. So Cassandra, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
So much for having me. I appreciate this so much. It's nice to meet you.
Well, same here. So congratulations on the release of your memoir.
Thank you so much.
And your memoir has a lot of history connected to it, and particularly as it relates to the healthcare industry. So just walk us a little bit through where your memoir starts and what is the main thing you want people to get from reading your book.
Sure. So the memoir is about a period when two parts of my life collided. I was trying and failing to get pregnant and experiencing a lot of just sort of ambiguous grief around that, because, you know, infertility doesn't come with like a ceremony for that sort of loss, right? And also just sort of realizing that felt oddly familiar to me, because I had grown up with a lot of that feeling in my household, a lot of sort of ambiguous grief. Before I was born, my dad lost 5 members of his family in a car accident that happened. That included his wife, his mother, his sister, and his niece, after whom I was named. And he had me years later. He met my mother soon after that. They went on with like building a new life together. And we didn't talk about what happened. We didn't talk about that loss. We didn't talk about the wreck at all. I did not even know when it happened. What would happen is, like, every now and then I'd be, you know, flipping through a photo album or something, and he would, you know, and I would say, "Where's this person?" And he would say, "The wreck. They died in the wreck." And so I think that it was during that period when I was trying to get pregnant and feeling a kind of, you know, living a little bit of a secret life as an infertile person, because it's a life that's not very visible, that I started realizing like I needed to go back to Alabama, which is where I'm from, and find out the secret of what happened there. So I went back and I did a lot of research, and what made the story in some ways come full circle was that, as I was learning more about the aftermath of the accident and what happened in the context of the healthcare system and segregated healthcare, I was finding all these parallels between, sort of my own experience trying to navigate the healthcare system now as this infertile Black woman, as some of the things that were happening to my family back then, and it just made me think a lot about the ways in which we're really living in the fallout of a segregated healthcare system.
Do you have a copy of your book,
I
handy?
do. I
Cover,
do.
and it's a very nice cover. And
Thank you.
So were you able to overcome your challenges with fertility?
I was. I have 2 kids now. It was a long process. It was a long process. I have 2 children now. It's interesting though, because I was talking to someone about this just a couple of nights ago, and I was saying to her that I have 2 children, but that experience was so profound that I will always think of myself as an infertile person, right? Like it's very sort of central to my identity.
Well, we had another guest on this maybe a year ago, I think, and we talked a little bit about that. How when you, and she had several miscarriages, and so and I had a miscarriage before I had my daughter, so I was able to relate. And then when you try to get pregnant after you've had a miscarriage and it doesn't happen immediately, you because when I got pregnant and when I had the miscarriage, that pregnancy, it happened immediately. Like as soon as my husband and I decided we wanted to get pregnant, and within 30 days I was pregnant. So
wow.
Yeah. So then after the miscarriage, you're healing, you're grieving, you're scared, you don't know, does this mean I can't have a child to term? You don't know what it means.
You don't know.
And so when we waited 6 months or so, and then we decided, okay, we're gonna try again. I didn't get pregnant right away, that second time. So then you start to say, oh my God, maybe I can't, you don't know until you've actually gone through a whole pregnancy and given birth, you don't know if your body can do it. And it's something that if you've had, and I didn't have, I was married twice, and the first time I didn't have children by choice. So my husband had 3 children by a previous marriage, and so we were going to just have the one. But I wasn't in my 20s, so you don't know. And, and the doctors tell you if you get, if you're over a certain age, the older you get, the chances are less. You might have a monster. That's basically what they tell you. I don't know if they tell everybody, but that's what they tell. They tell you your child should be deformed. So all of this is going through your mind, and it you can really go into a depression if you allow yourself to. So I can relate to that whole thing. And then most women want to have children. That's the vast majority want to have children. Yeah, at some point. I mean, that's like your calling as a female almost. 'Cause that's your job. So it can be challenging. Now the wreck that is a major loss, to lose all those family members at one time.
Yeah, it was terrible loss.
Tremendous trauma. And so he lost his wife, his mother, and his sister.
And his sister, his brother-in-law, and his niece, who was 3 years old. And this one time. Yeah. And
that in and of itself is unbelievable.
Yeah. It really is. And I think too that when we talk about it now, I think that one of the things that we have to consider is like how few resources you would have had after having experienced a trauma like that in 1960, which is when it happened. Yeah, you know, like, I
people
mean,
didn't
what
go to
are your,
counseling. There was no
no,
therapy or none of that. You just had to live with
yeah,
it. Just
exactly. And what little, you know, psychiatric treatment that people had available to them at the time was not really available to Black people either.
right.
So
That's
if you're a
true.
Black man and you're experiencing a trauma in 1960 in Alabama, what are your options in terms of like, you know, sort of formal therapeutic, you know, sort of treatments that we would consider now under those circumstances? And, you know, I think for my dad and for many people back then, the goal was to survive it, right? Like
Right.
to come out somehow on the other side. And but there wasn't really a place to deal with the emotional consequences of what happened. That wasn't something that we did. The idea, it was that the moving on was the dealing with it. And so there were all of these ways in which that past just kept visiting us in our lives together all those years later.
So when you did your memoir, where does it start? And what's the trajectory? You don't have to give us any spoilers, but
Okay.
but
It,
where do
yeah,
you start your
yeah.
memoir? You start
I
with the wreck,
actually,
actually, with the wreck.
no, I don't start with the wreck because I tell certain parts of it from my perspective as a child, and that's really where the book begins. Because, you know, I have these memories of going and visiting these grave sites with my parents and not exactly knowing what we were doing, but you know, we were, you know, in the deep South, and you tend graves on a regular basis, right? And Mother's Day or
Right.
you know, sort of exactly. So we would be tending these graves, and I could, you know, remember a couple of things. So I start with these early memories. One is really about when we would go to the area, which was like a rural area that my family was from because they were farmers. When we would go there, I would encounter what were usually older Black women who would see me. And apparently I look a great deal like my grandmother and my aunt. And I can remember meeting these older women and them really taking a very good look at me and saying, oh, she's just like them. And sometimes they were disturbed by it, and sometimes they cried, sometimes they were suspicious of it. But oftentimes it was welcome for me because it was a way in which I often felt loved by strangers that I encountered because they recognized them in me in some way. And it felt like belonging in this really powerful way. And so the book really begins and moves back and forth between my childhood and my adulthood when I'm trying to get pregnant. So it kind of moves back and forth in time in terms of its form.
Okay. How much does your dad talk about his relatives that perished in the wreck? Like growing up,
Yeah.
did he just kind of like bottle it up and just not talk about it at all? And I know sometimes with men, they're kind of taught to not be emotional so how much did he share?
Not a lot. I did know them through stories, but the reason I knew them through stories is because when family would visit, that's when I would hear those stories. And there were a couple of stories that they loved to tell over and over again. My grandmother was someone who she was not good at following the rules of Jim Crow, and she often sort of, you know, kind of flagrantly did not follow those rules. And the family was like incredibly proud of her, in part because they also saw her as their protector. And so I knew those stories, and she was always talked about as someone who was this incredibly protective mother, and as someone who was fearless and ready to die for her children, which was very meaningful as a kid. But I usually heard those stories when our extended family was together. And I do remember asking my father questions about her and their lives sometimes, and he would talk a little bit about it. But we never really talked about the wreck itself or the aftermath of it. We didn't talk about it at all. So yeah, I definitely think that it really wasn't, and I write about this in the book, it really wasn't until I was trying to get pregnant that I actually said to him, "What happened, Daddy? What happened?" And that's when, and it was hard to even ask because it's very difficult to ask someone about the most painful day of their
Their
lives,
lives.
you
Clearly.
know?
I mean, normally when your mom, well, any loved one, but when your mom passes, that's so horrible. But if you
Mhm.
lose all those people at one time, I, it's the kind of trauma that, you wouldn't even want to get out of bed. I mean, it's just, it's, and back then, and here's something else that happened. Now, it was a couple of things about during that time, and I don't know a lot about it, but just, hearing stories. But Black people didn't go in the system. That's one thing. We weren't put in institutions, or we didn't even seek institutional help as far as psychiatry would be concerned, because it wasn't for us. We took care of our people ourselves. And sometimes there would be family members who were considered to be a little off, but they just stayed with the family. We just worked it out. But most of the time it was women, though, and men just weren't expected to ever need that. Do you know what I mean? From
Yeah,
this
yeah.
macho-ness, or just they were expected to be tough. But
Mhm.
losing all those people at one time, I'm sure talking about it was just too painful.
Yeah, I think it was too painful, and I don't think there was really a place for that pain to go, you know? As I said, he met my mother soon after. They got married the following year, and started having kids, and I think that part of, um, the form of healing that a lot of Black people sought then, and even before then, even in the context of slavery, was about reproduction, right? It was about creating families. And while there obviously is some, like, kind of therapeutic benefit possible, that's possible in that context, at the same time, though, um, that was done because of the lack of other kinds of resources, right? Like, it's not ideal as a way
Right.
to survive by, sort of creating new families.
Yeah. One negative outgrowth of just all the centuries that we've been through is the notion that somehow we are tougher, that we can withstand a whole lot of extra stuff that other people can't. And that's, we're human. And so just the fact that we absorb it doesn't mean that it's good, or that we really can do it,
Yeah.
that we really can function. And there does need to be more resources available for people. And more people are starting to seek therapy and counseling when they need it, but it's still fairly new, relatively speaking, in our
Yeah,
country.
I think it's true. And I write about it in the book a bit too, because, like, as I was experiencing infertility, I did start, sort of seeking a therapist specifically to talk about some of those issues around grief and loss. Um and quite honestly, I really kind of struggled to find, at the time, therapists who related to my experience enough to be able to talk competently about it. And when I say related to, I don't even mean people who had the exact same experience. Like, I definitely encountered a few therapists, particularly these were largely white women therapists who could really not see the big deal in a way, like meaning that for them, I actually had this one therapist that I write about in the book who basically she gave me this whole spiel about how she had a friend who was infertile and she really wanted to get pregnant. And then she ended up with a child with a disability. And she said that as if a child with a disability would be the absolute worst thing that could ever happen. I mean, it was incredibly problematic on so many levels. But I did find myself always in these sort of situations where even in the context of therapy, where there are ways in which people who don't have access to Black women's experiences are not always capable of providing, kind of, any sort of therapeutic benefit at times as well. And it really took a while to find, a competent therapist in my area. And remember, we were still seeing people in person all the time then too. So that often limited, the, sort of diversity of the pool of people that you could choose from. And so I do write about the fact that, like, in the same way that I found that, issues around healthcare and race, I also found the issues around like mental health care and race as well.
Yeah, I've heard that from several people. There are more people, especially particularly Black women, going into psychotherapy, psychiatry, but it's still fairly new, and they're spread out all around the country, so it's still challenging. So from when people read your memoir, what do you want them to walk away knowing?
I do want them to think about this idea that our, sort of histories of power and disempowerment are, intrinsically linked to our experience now. I think that even when I was like first seeing doctors, right, and thinking about like the first doctor I go to see basically told me that, you're Black women don't experience infertility, right? Like that was the response that I got. And it was troubling on so many, I know it was troubling on so many different levels. But part of what's so troubling about it too is that when you're experiencing infertility, that you want to hear somebody say you couldn't possibly be infertile, right? You just don't want it to be because of racism, but like it was incredibly sort of manipulative, right? At the same time, but she said that because she really believed it. And by the way, this was a Black woman doctor, and I think that. For me, I think in reflection, it was sort of recognizing that, well, she was trained in the same system that trained white doctors who think this, right? And that, we often have this idea that like somebody signs, the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and we move on and we're done. And the truth is like all of these moments are incredibly connected. So for example, I think about the fact that my family, because of when the accident happened, that determined everything about their care, right? So, you don't just get an ambulance in 1960, right? You got to wait for a colored ambulance. That's a different service, usually sometimes coming from a different place. You don't just go to the nearest hospital. You got to go to the hospital that has colored ward.
Colored hospital.
Exactly. And when you get there, when your loved ones get there, they've got to stay, right, in a colored waiting room. Alabama also had laws stating that white female nurses could not treat Black men, right? So not every staff member can attend to you when you get to that hospital. And so I think that, in my own, when I think about how I learned about like the civil rights movement, and of course there was a great deal of emphasis, I think, for all of us on the struggle itself, right? For, the activism. And I think that we sometimes get like these either sanitized versions of what is segregation, or we see these, sort of explosive moments of violence that people focus on. And there's so much in between there that was determining what your day-to-day life looked like, from what sidewalk you walked on, right? To, you know, if you were in an accident in 1960, you know, it was your fault if you were Black. It doesn't matter what actually happened, you were at fault, right? And that was sort of the unspoken, you know, rules of the road. And so I think that sort of recognizing all of these ways in which we are, you know, kind of living out the aftermath of that, I think it's incredibly important because it's a way in which we can all understand ourselves, right? I think that, you know, I felt incredibly powerless when I was sort of seeing doctors in the very beginning. And I at the same time, though, I felt I kind of internalized that powerlessness, right? In other words, you know, I felt like I'm an educated person. I should be able to take control of this situation. I should be able to advocate for myself. And at the same time, thinking about it in that way allowed me to really sort of not see all the structures that were in place that were creating that particular experience that had nothing to do with whether or not I was advocating enough. In other words, when you walk into a doctor's office and the doctor tells you, well, you can't be infertile because you're Black, like, how do you begin to advocate in that moment, right? Like, how, like, there, that was layers and layers and of history, right? That had made her believe that. And so I do think that, like, one of the things I want people to take from the book is, you know, sort of thinking about the ability to think about those connections and to acknowledge that there are things that we don't know, you know, about those connections that deserve investigation. You know, I had never imagined that wreck happening in real place in real time because no one had ever talked to me about it. And it wasn't until I was like going through newspapers with my father. He couldn't talk about everything, so he kind of directed me to these newspapers, but then he decided he would go with me. And I write about this because, you know, we're looking at these newspapers and I felt like I was just sort of drowning in segregation and what it meant on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, you know, at one point we were searching for obituaries because I was trying to confirm certain dates, and you know, we couldn't find the obituaries. And
yeah, they probably would have only been in a Black paper.
well, here's the thing. They had it turns out they could only be printed in the newspaper once a week. They couldn't be printed with with the obituaries of white people. So it turns out they had a section in the newspaper called News About Negroes. That is an exact quote. Whenever I say that, people say, what was it really called? It was called News About Negroes,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And all the obituaries had to be in that place. So if you died and you were buried before Thursday came around, then it would just be put in there after the fact because it couldn't be put in any other day, and it had to be in one column that included all the weddings, all the church socials, you know, all the obituaries in one small column.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there is so much history in everything that you talked about. But I was talking to Donna Hill, who's I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a prolific African-American author. She's written, she's more in the romance, women's fiction, but she's written, she was on last week, and she's written 90 books. So
wow.
Yeah, we have
prolific.
we have some writers, and that most of them have been on the show, that have written, you know, 50 plus. It's a lot that have written 50 plus books. But we were talking about how everything that happens to us has happened on a historical continuum. It's not just an isolate. It's not in a vacuum. You know, whatever happened with your parents or your grandparents, that's all connected to where you are right now. And all those experiences are woven into who you are and what you believe and think, and your fears and hopes and all of that.
Absolutely.
All of it's on a continuum. And so I have a good friend who lost her husband and daughter in an accident together. And she has a daughter. She has another daughter. She hasn't remarried. but so I can't imagine losing 5 people. I just, God bless. Is your dad still living?
No, my dad passed away in 2018. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Because I figured 1960, if he was old enough to be married in 1960, that would have made him like 80 something now, maybe, or in his 90s
Yeah.
now.
Mhm,
So if he was
mhm,
still alive, but
mhm.
at least you have had the chance to explore some of his history and then share it with people, even after he's gone. And that's
Yeah,
the
I'm so
beauty
grateful for
of
that.
writing and books
Mm,
and telling stories, is that even after we're gone, the stories still live.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's such a good point, right? And I'm very grateful for having had that experience and actually being able to research this book with him.
So show us a copy of the book again, so let people know.
There you
It's
go.
called The Wreck,
Mm-hmm.
and it's by
Awesome.
Cassandra Jackson, and it came
Indeed.
out last Tuesday, and you
Mm-hmm.
can get your copy wherever books are sold. Well,
Awesome.
congratulations on the memoir. Is
Thank
this your
you.
first
And
book?
no, but it is my first book with like a major trade press. My other books were scholarly books, so it feels like a first book to me, you know?
Okay, doing the
It does.
rounds with the interviews.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're excited to have you on the show. And
Thank
we
you.
we heard about the book, and we asked them to have you on. So that
Awesome.
was how
Thank
it
you
happened.
so much. I really appreciate you having me. It means so much to me. Thank you.
You're welcome, and
Mhm.
much success with it. I'm sure it'll go well.
I hope so. Thank you. Have a good
Okay,
evening.
same to you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, everybody. Well, this was my chance to be on by myself. I think I handled it okay. I miss Rhonda, but she'll be back next week. And I appreciate all of you all who tuned in, were patient with us when we had the little technical glitch. And just thank you all for tuning in to Black Authors Matter TV. I'm Gwen Richardson signing off, and I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you for tuning in, and join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for another edition of Black Authors Matter TV.